Good morning and welcome to Coffee with KBLIC. Uh, Today we have with us Karleen Porcena, and she is the VP and Relationship Manager and MyBanker at Reevx Labs, powered by Berkshire Bank. So let us just say hello to everyone and welcome to Coffee with KBLIC. Good morning, all. Coffee with KBLIC is a conversation with folks in the community, either small business owners or people who help empower them. And so we're hoping today to have a good conversation with you folks. And so you can participate by, and let me pull that up on the screen. You can participate by commenting in the live chat, emailing us if you have a question that's more detailed at ask@bpl.org. You can also tweet at us and include the hashtag Coffee with KBLIC. And if you want to make an appointment, you can also call us and you can attend at a drop-in too. But without further ado, I'm going to get back to Karleen. Karleen, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and how long you've been at Reevx and Berkshire Bank?
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me. Really excited to be here today. I'm Karleen Porcena. I have been with the Reevx and Berkshire team for a little over a year now. Very interesting time to kind of transition to a new industry, a new company, but everything happens for a reason. My background is very much in the community development and entrepreneurship space, particularly working with underrepresented communities. So I'm really excited to be here because for me, I always try to be a sponge and soak up as much information to kind of disseminate it back to the individuals, organizations that need it most. So I love having conversations with nonprofits and small business owners. I feel more at peace in that space than sometimes at the bank.
Oh, awesome. Well, thank you for joining us this morning. So speaking of nonprofits, so that's the space you were in beforehand.
Yeah.
So I have a question. Because now you're on the other side, or actually you've
On the
been on
dark
both
side.
sides. Yeah. Like, what are some common things that you see, like that early stage, like nonprofits, like either pitfalls or sort of mental traps that people are thinking when they're thinking about starting a nonprofit, or they're at the beginning of a nonprofit?
Yeah, great question. I would say, typically people who want to start a nonprofit are trying to provide a service that they don't see based out of need, right?
Right.
I would say before actually going to set up the process, because it's a very much heavy, intensive administrative and paperwork process, to really do the groundwork to understand what it takes to have a nonprofit that's consistently up and running.
Right.
I would recommend anyone kind of partnering with an existing organization and see if you can work with them. Sometimes there are nonprofits that are kind of willing to take on people or take on organizations to kind of operate a specific service or a specific program as a fiscal agent or as a particular vendor. So that might be a nice kind of way to ease yourself into that space. And nonprofit or small business, it's always important to have a team. I cannot stress that enough because it's very daunting to start something like that on your own. So just think about who it is that you want to work with, what skill sets that could complement your own, that would kind of help you push your vision or push your mission to that next step.
Yeah. A common thing we see is it's usually like a solo person and they have this vision, and it's doing that environmental scan sort of first, seeing out who else is out there is doing that. So
Yeah.
I'm happy that you brought that up, because it's one of those things, like when it's a large thing that you're undertaking, even when you're starting a small business too.
Mhm.
Sometimes it makes a lot of sense, like if you're doing a very niche specific kind of work, but then some people want to start small businesses and they don't have a team.
Yeah. And with technology nowadays, there's so many ways to get connected to
Right.
other organizations and businesses. It's really about kind of asking those questions, tapping into the specific industry that,
Right.
that you want to be in, being able to know like who is in this space in the city that you live in. Are there kind of key stakeholders you can be
Mhm.
going and talking to, getting more resources? So there's a lot of like pre-work that can happen before actually launching that I think, once you have that foundation, it makes the end results not easier, but I think maybe a little smoother.
Of course. Um, and so when folks are starting their small business or nonprofit, they sort of they need financing. What do you see some stumbling blocks that people sort of fall into when they are trying to get the capital to start their business?
Yeah, that's a good question as well. I think for small businesses, it's important to know what it is you need the funds for and
Mm-hmm.
to be as specific as possible. I
Yep.
think sometimes people just tend to say, I need money or I need funding or I need X, Y, and Z. And, we could all use some money, but I think figuring out like, is it really funding that you need? Do you need a network in a certain area to kind of help
Right.
you think about processing and operations? Do you need an intern who can help you with the administrative stuff? Do you need, it's just thinking about what your specific needs are. And if the financing is what it is, then figuring out who is the right partner for you. Because not
Right.
all, not all loans, not all grants, not all financial resources are created equal. You
Yeah.
want to make sure you're getting into the right financial situation. So kind of doing that financial scan beforehand is really crucial. And as an entrepreneur, kind of understanding where you are yourself personally and if you can actually take on that
Yes.
level of debt is super critical. Because from a bank's perspective, at the end of the day, they're looking at, can this person, can this company, can this organization pay this money back?
Right. Because you don't want to be in a situation where, oops, I just realized my mic is far away.
Oh,
um,
yeah. Now I can hear
yeah,
you really well.
yeah. Whoops. I was just like, something's off. Uh, so having a brain fog this morning.
It's
But
Monday.
it is Monday. Um, but what I was gonna say is like that's all very important. And I agree with you because like I think sometimes people just underestimate the amount of pre-work is the right word to start a small business. And the financing piece, I think it's hard to have that conversation with someone when you're just like, oh, you have to make sure all your ducks are in a row. So when people are approaching a financial institution for loans or possible grants or whatever,
Mhm,
um, like what questions should they be asking to make sure that they're a good fit?
mhm. Ooh.
Yeah.
Um, so I think you wanna know what kind of services and products are available to you.
Yeah. Hmm.
If there are additional fees, included in an account that you might not know about,
Mm.
if there are situations where you have, like, limited number of withdrawals on an account, like, just small things like that that I've seen people, um, not realize until after.
Okay.
On the lending side, I would probably ask questions like, how is there an opportunity for me to repay this sooner? Are you guys flexible with creating repayment plans? How
Hmm.
is the risk being assessed? If you're applying, sometimes people are applying with two people. Are you looking at the personal financial statements from myself as well as my colleague?
Hmm.
I would say ask as many questions as you can before signing anything.
Oh yeah.
It's very intimidating to go into any kind of financial institution. But, before you get there, you're really in the driver's seat. You can ask as many questions as you want, and folks have to essentially answer them. And if they can't get someone else who can answer them, but that's really your opportunity to get into the nitty gritty, I think. So,
Right.
yeah, asking, are these loans typical for this bank? Do they tend to
Hmm.
do larger loans? Are they more of like a early startup lender? If if
Ah.
maybe the bank might have referral partners. I know at our bank, if it's something that we can't do, we tend to, refer them to another organization that has the experience of working with those kind of loans. So I would never
Oh.
take no, no and or no but. So just kind of making sure you're asking those follow-up questions as well.
See, I didn't know that about referral. I kind of just assumed like you like show up to the bank and you're just like, "Here's my business plan." So
Business
it's a
plan
little.
is key.
Oh yes. Um, or is like a business plan like really key, or can people just have like a rough sketch or like a business canvas, or do you want to see like the full plan?
That's a good question. I think it kind of depends on the banker,
Okay.
to be honest, and the bank. Um, I would say if you're an early stage business, you really want to show that you've done your homework on the validity of your company, right? So if you're
Right.
coming in with like a two-page summary and you have no background or no experience in that area, it's going to be a disadvantage. But if you come in and you're showing who your team is and you've done the market research and the market analysis and you figured out your pricing based on, things that you've seen, and you have this kind of legitimate model, that's when you really want to come through strong with a very kind of robust business plan, because people are looking at that.
Okay.
The underwriters, they're not meeting with the businesses individually. So the more you can say in your business plan, the less, back and forth you'll probably be
Oh.
seeing.
So so someone meets with like a banker and then that gets like passed along to the underwriter. Is that how that goes? Because like I've never started a business and I've never done this process. And for people who might be watching, that's something that they like might not know. And does this work
Yeah.
for? Yeah.
Yeah, typically the bankers are like the almost like the ambassadors, right? We're the ones that are kind
Hmm.
of going out, making the relationships, figuring out the business needs and all of that. And a business will send an application in, and a banker is typically sending it to a small business team or a small business underwriter that then assesses if the loan is, able to get funded or not.
Right. Oh, that makes. Thank you. Because like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's one of those things like it happens in a vacuum, and then all of a sudden you have cash, or not. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh, so we have a couple of comments. It's like starting your own business, you need to research your field. And also, does the BPL offer sample business plans? Yes, we do. If you need help with some market research stuff, you could also like email us as well. I'm just gonna pop our email in the chat. So if you're looking for help on those sorts of things, you can definitely reach out to us as well. But yeah, going back to it's you need to research your field. It's so true. I like that you used the phrase validity of your business, because that's something that we run into too when we're sort of trying to help people shape their business. Like people will come in and they'll ask us for research help, and so when we're asking people sort of to doing the reference interview to explain their business, and they kind of can't. So like that's one of the things. Like I'm not poo-pooing on people. Sometimes people are not the best communicator. I am the first in line to be that. But like I would say, being able to communicate the value and prove the value of the business is definitely um
Yeah,
important.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And, just to take that even a step further, I think if the business makes sense to you, that's one thing, but you really have to understand, like,
Mm,
who is your customer, who is your client, and does it make sense to them? Because you're not creating a business for yourself. You're creating your business for a specific need that you see out, whether it's a nonprofit or a small business. You're creating something that's not already there. And if
right.
you're creating something that's there, it's kind of like, what's the point? You got to have, um, you know, a better access point. You have to have some kind of additional feature, but you don't. The reason why market research is so important is because you don't want to duplicate what's already out there and spend
Hmm.
all this time and money doing something that literally is already being done. Um,
Right.
so being able to make sure that the business model and concept is valid to you is one thing, but I would say, you need to kind of talk it over with 3 or 4 different people before even, going into before going into the lab and asking to do market research. Like, have you vetted this with your own network? Do they think
Yeah.
that it makes sense? Sometimes you might have the wrong network, but it's just around kind of finding the right people.
Sure. Um, when I was at school, we had this thing where like starting a small business or a nonprofit is kind of like being a scientist in a way. So you have to like sort of test your
So
hypothesis and
funny.
what would the market sort of bear. So like I just remember that I just like it was like an entrepreneurship, it was an elective, and I found it very interesting. Um
Yeah,
and yeah,
absolutely.
that sort of work definitely what helps. And if you're applying for a loan or a grant as a nonprofit, and you can showcase that that you've done that homework, you'll
Yeah.
probably be more likely to get it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and the importance of, like, really understanding your kind of clients or understanding your customer and understanding your need is that you're providing a better product or a better
Hmm.
service.
Right.
So a lot of the times when I meet with entrepreneurs and they
Hmm.
have a very general statement about who their market or target audience is, the more you can define it and the more you can, like, kinda get into the nitty-gritty. Some people call it like, you want to create a prototype or
Right.
whatever it is. That's just like fancy language for saying you want to create the actual individual client or customer. And you want
Yep.
to think about what it is that they are worried about. What are they thinking about
Exactly.
when they wake up in the morning? What are the kind of places that they go to? Like, if you can get into the nuances at that level, you're really creating
Hmm.
something super, super unique, and not just say, oh, my product is for women or my product is for people in the inner city. It's like that is way too broad.
Oh yeah. um so developing the those like sort of personas, I think
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
helpful.
Yeah.
We can help with that. So like if people have questions, we have some tools that can get you started. So that's something
Nice.
that like if people wanted to chat with, we do have drop-ins every Thursday at 11 for using business resources, and actually on Fridays as well. We have drop-ins for nonprofit grant seeking stuff. So
Oh,
switch
nice.
gears. Yeah, so that's
That's
a
pretty
service
cool.
that that we have. You can also send us an email if you need a concierge search. So we are subscribers for the Foundation Center network. I didn't know if you knew that, but so like if people are looking for grants, we have remote access to the light version, but if they need something more robust, that's something that we can provide.
Oh, good to
um
know.
yeah, but speaking of like another common misconception about nonprofits is that you don't need a revenue making component. And I definitely have this conversation with people where they're like, oh, I'll just get grants. And it's like, oh, you kind of have to
Yeah,
charge something. You have to figure out a way to make money outside of that. Yeah. So
definitely.
I don't know if that's a conversation you've had with folks who are trying to start their nonprofit.
Yeah, I think, you know, there's so many different mechanisms and models. I think right now you're seeing a lot of like social enterprises. That's a
Right.
really, really big things that are coming up. So that's essentially small business that has kind of like a social mission to it.
Hmm.
Nonprofits are also doing the same thing. You're seeing some nonprofits that are, selling books or selling their services certain ways, or even some of the grants that you're seeing out there. Some of them are
Right.
like payments for fees that you provide. So there's so many different structures around them. You
Hmm.
definitely never want to rely on one sole kind of income stream,
Yes.
especially with a very kind of just with the administration and stuff that you're seeing now, you kind of never know where things are going, and you
Right.
don't want to be fully dependent on one specific mechanism. There's always challenges with that area, and even with grants, there's so many different types of grants. So you're thinking about federal grants, there's state grants, there's
Hmm.
philanthropy, there's pass-through grants. I mean, there's literally a plethora of things that you could tap into.
Sure. What's a pass-through grant? I have no idea. I've never heard that term before.
So that's like when you have these kind of like middle organizations that get funding from a federal government, and then they are the
Oh,
ones that pass it through to kind of other organizations. So you don't even
okay.
have to be like the primary recipient.
Okay, that's cool. I didn't realize that. There's so many resources out there, and I like even me, like just like doing the research for patrons, I learn new stuff all the time.
Yeah,
Um,
and
yeah.
that's a good point because I think I've met a lot of people that kind of jump the gun that need a service done, and their first gut is to just like pay for it to be done. And I always
Mm,
caution people about that because there are a lot of really great free resources out there.
mhm,
So again, just tapping into different networks where,
mhm,
whether it's the Boston Public Library or the city of Boston, or a lot of city governments have resource pages and stuff like that. But
mhm.
I would always say, like, you know, look for 3 free resources before paying for them, especially in the startup phase.
Oh yeah, especially if you're trying to like bootstrap or whatever. That's like you don't want to be spending
Yeah.
money that you need later.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Like, you shouldn't be
Uh,
paying someone to help you to write your business plan. There's so many different avenues of where you can do
sure.
that. Yeah.
And if people need help with that, we don't help write business plans, but we have sample business plans, as one of the viewers had asked about earlier. And then we also have partners that can help folks if you wanted to, do the research to fill out certain parts of the business plan, like demographic data and all that stuff. We can help you find that. And we have partners and we have classes and all that jazz. So look at our calendar. Haha. Um, um, so we've been talking about sort of like how you would want to talk to the bank, but you don't talk to the bank only once. You want to kind of build a relationship with the bank when
Yeah.
you're or a financial institution. Um, so like, what's the best way of going about doing that?
Um, I think, some of it could be around just going to, I mean, it's a little bit harder now to go to an actual branch to talk to someone.
Mm-hmm.
But finding ways to reach out to a bank that you're interested in connecting with, whether it's like online, calling through and basically asking to talk to a business banker.
Yep.
And then from there, speaking with them around what your specific needs are, if there are products and services. I think people tend to think only about products when it comes to
Oh
banks,
yeah.
but banks also have a lot of services that you can um, tap into as well. And
Okay.
just kind of getting to know them in that sense. Sometimes I always like to think about having at least 2 people that you can connect with at a bank, and then kind of just go from bank to bank and see if you get a good vibe from from one bank. If you're
Mhm.
more mission focused, see how they're interacting in the community, some of the work that they're doing,
Right.
you know what I mean? Things that are really that are interesting to you. Those are the ways that I think about kind of building relationships with the bank. And once you find someone that you feel some kind of camaraderie with, or someone that you can trust, and then you can kind of get into the weeds of your business and what your needs are, and how they can support you.
So the reason why I asked that is this sort of ties in, and we had this conversation sort of last week, but this sort of ties into why certain businesses were able to get PPP loans before other businesses.
Absolutely.
Um, yeah. Um, and so in terms of like paycheck protection program, like what was that process like? I imagine it was like kind of nerve wracking at the beginning when they were first released.
Yeah,
But like,
those are
what sort of
crazy.
questions were you getting when people were applying for the PPP loans? If you don't
I
mind
think,
my asking.
yeah, sure. I think, one of the biggest challenges with that is that there was a lot of complications around who was eligible,
Hmm.
how to check if you were eligible, how to figure out what your maximum number was.
Okay.
Um, because nonprofits were and contractors were also eligible, this is
Hmm.
not, they weren't used to working with the SBA, who are the main kind of facilitators behind the loan.
Hmm.
So even like getting the messaging out there was really, really a challenge. Unfortunately, some of the we've heard so many situations where small businesses were calling their banks, or they couldn't actually physically get to their
Mhm.
bank and wanting to know more information to see if they were eligible, being placed on hold for hours and just kind of not hearing back. Like that was a huge challenge. And we
Jeez.
were being referred to people who 2 3 months later just, I applied but still haven't heard back from my bank, and
Mhm.
things like that. So you know, that you didn't see the same type of challenge with some of the bigger companies, because
Mhm.
those companies tend to have strong relationships with banks. And when you have a good relationship, you're going to be someone who's at the top of a list to get information out, right? You want to make sure that the
Mhm.
client stays happy. You want to make sure that they know kind of the most updated information, and that's why it's important to, really kind of establish something before there's a critical need.
Right. But that's difficult in communities that are sort of underbanked. And like how do people from those communities actually sort of secure financing and loans for their small business? Is it How does that work? Because like traditionally, many communities are underbanked, and when you try to go through with something as large as starting a
Mhm.
business, like
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would kinda take it back to figuring out who the right players are. Maybe the
Yep.
first step is not going to a bank. Maybe it's
Mm.
going to a community development, a CDFI, a financial institution who
Oh yeah.
are much more, tapped into the local scene. They know kind of the local players and are a lot more comfortable with doing, early stage loans. But I do also want to just mention, this is not all on the small business part. Like banks really have to do
Hmm.
their own part in making sure that small businesses are actually getting the information that they need. And I think a lot of the times we're like, well, what does the small business have to do? What should they do better? What should they do better? And banks got to do better. They have to make sure that they're reaching all populations, especially as you see a lot of banks kind of moving more into the inner cities and working with more communities of color, making sure they have the right people that have the cultural competencies to work with the small
Hmm.
businesses. And language is a huge
Oh
barrier, you know
yeah.
what I mean? Like, and not even, I mean, someone was talking to me the other day about even um, obviously like languages, as far as different languages from different countries, but even people um, who are have different language issues. I forget what what they're called specifically,
Hmm.
but people who are blind, or people who are
Right.
deaf, and there's a specific
Accessibility, is that what it
there's
is?
a
No.
specific name
Mm.
for it. It's like
Yeah.
a not like a English for second languages, but there's a specific name for different languages
Hmm.
that we just recently started thinking about.
Oh, I didn't even think about that. See, and that's like one of those things, and like maybe I'm a victim of like able, not a victim. I'm guilty of ableism.
Yeah, yeah. I
Yeah,
got to think of the word and send it to you,
yeah,
because now it's going to
yeah.
bug me.
Oh no, I would be interested in just doing some research on that, just because, like, I think there is a default if you are a sighted hearing person that you just go through certain
Right.
procedures and then you realize that that's not necessarily equitable for those folks as well who start and run and manage their own businesses.
Right, right,
Yeah.
right. You just want to make
Yeah.
sure. So, I mean, on both ends, I think banks have to do a better job of
Mhm.
being accessible, being more inclusive. And then on the small business side, you really like, the stuff is out there,
Mhm.
but you have to do the legwork to find it, which is
Yeah.
unfortunate, but that's kind of how things are right now.
Yeah. I imagine that are a lot of people starting businesses now? Um
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think, there's always this.
Mhm.
I think I read this article a couple weeks ago around how innovation is really sparked by like crisis, and when there's
Mhm.
a lot of, hectic things happening in the world. And with everything that's happening with COVID and
Mhm.
everything that's happening with kind of like the racial reckoning and
Mhm. Mhm.
stuff that this country is going through, there's a lot of people who are using this time to think differently around, the ways that our social systems are, the ways that they
Sure.
actually get money. I mean, tons of people are being laid off and have to supplement their income. So,
Right.
trying times are typically where innovation comes from. So yeah, you're seeing a lot of people start their own business. They might consider them
Mhm.
more like side hustles or
Yeah.
but side hustle or not, an entrepreneur is an entrepreneur.
It's so true. And like I think people sort of poo-poo on like home-based businesses, but like you can rake in a lot of dough doing that.
Yeah.
I- yeah, we've seen a few people who are starting side hustles, but it's just like, oh, you could turn this into like a full-time thing if you really wanted to. It's just scaling. Like
Yeah.
that's something where like people will ask questions sort of about like, oh, how do I scale my business? And like it's just like, ooh, that's a little outside of what I can do, but I don't know if that's
Yeah.
advice or necessarily that you can give, or we have partners that we also refer people to.
Yeah.
So
I
yeah.
think, a lot of the questions around scaling and kind of
Hmm.
growing your business have to be kind of grounded in the operations and
Right.
how you're executing your time. So a lot of the times, home-based businesses are great, but you have
Hmm.
people like working 24/7 because they're working full time and they're doing this in the morning and then
Hmm.
doing it in the evening and they're exerting so much of their own time and energy. So
Right.
thinking about operationally, okay, let me see if I dedicate 2 days to this, and just thinking through what some of the mechanisms would be, kind of thinking about what your goal is and then moving
Hmm.
backwards. Are there people that can help you? Are there commercial kitchens? If it's a food business, again, are there small businesses that you can work with?
Hmm.
But all of the kind of growing and scaling questions is
Hmm.
those are like there's so many kind of coaching
Hmm.
support systems out there that I would encourage people to tap into. But before you grow and before you scale, you got
Hmm.
to make sure that you have that viable product. And if you've been doing something for a year, 2 years, and there's still a demand for it, I think that's kind of one of those stages where you're like, okay, maybe I can take this to the next step. Um, I always encourage people, especially the demographics that I work with,
Hmm.
people try to shy away from like having a stable job and then using the side hustle to get income. They're like, you're not a real entrepreneur unless you're doing this full time. And I am not about that. I'm like, you got to do what you got to do to make it through. So if that means that you have to keep a part-time job or,
Hmm.
whatever kind of stability it is that you have, figure it out for you. There's not like one path to
Yeah.
entrepreneurship that everyone has to follow.
Sure. Oh, and that's kind of a gatekeepery attitude about
Yeah,
being like, if you're willing to put in the time and build something yourself, like that is your business.
right.
Like, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, um oh, I had a question and then oh, I do remember you mentioned commercial kitchens. I saw something actually really interesting that ghost kitchens are sort of taking off. Like
Ooh, what's
yeah,
that?
so basically, it's like restaurants are basically operating out of the same kitchen with the same menu, basically to like get like Uber Eats or Postmates or whatever. So they'll have like several restaurants, but it'll all be several different, but it'll be the same menu, but things will be named differently, and it's basically so they
Oh.
can. I think it's they're cheating the system a little bit so they can like sort of advertise themselves more, but it's the
Mm,
one place. So that's interesting when
it
you
is. I'm
mentioned.
telling you, innovation.
Yeah, it is,
I've
and
seen
it's sort of funny. Yeah.
I've seen a business, one specific
Hmm.
restaurant or one specific space have two businesses within it. And
Hmm.
they have one business in the morning that's more like cafe style, and then they have
Hmm.
an evening one that serves more like dinner type of things.
Oh
And
yeah.
it's two completely separate businesses, but what a cool model that you're able to kind of like leverage that space, but also use it essentially
Yeah.
all day.
Yeah, no, that's smart. Because then it's two businesses, and the way rents are, like you look at the blight sort of like happening downtown, where like
Mhm.
almost like I think
I
like
know,
half
it's
of New
scary.
yeah, it is. And then like I basically see like posts all the time where like all the restaurants are closing, and you're like, no.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and you see a lot of, like, pop-up shops that are
Hmm.
happening, so
Hmm.
restaurants that are closing down have new spaces that are doing, like, 3-month pop-ups just to test out their menu and seeing if there's,
Mm,
like, a market for that specific type of cuisine. So there's
right.
so many different, options, I think even, I don't know why my brain is staying at, food industry, but no, you don't need to go from, baking the greatest cakes in your home to having a full-on bakery. Like, there's so many different, you know, alternatives.
Yeah. Oh, the notion of having a pop up, I never even thought of it. I was like, oh, it's just a promotional thing. But the actual to test the market, and then you have real data there, because then you're like, oh, I need a loan for a commercial kitchen. This is my sales from this 3 months.
Absolutely.
I never thought of that. I'm
Yeah,
learning so
yeah.
much.
And then
Yeah.
you're talking to your clients and you're
Mhm.
asking, is this how much you would pay for whatever dinner? Is this like, does this
Mhm.
compare to the experience that you'd get somewhere downtown or somewhere in the
Mhm.
neighborhood that you want to go to? So yeah,
Mhm.
it's almost like the best of both worlds. You're really getting a trial onto your concept and model without having to pay for all the craziness that goes into running your own business.
Yeah.
I've even seen some people uh, who have like baking goods who actually make their goods and sell them in other places, which again, you don't have to have your own full on bakery, but
Mhm.
maybe you're connecting with a coffee shop and selling your goods there. So there's a lot of different alternatives that folks can
Yes.
think about.
So, and if people have questions about cottage food laws, you can contact us. So, if you're doing this stuff at home, because there's the difference between a commercial wholesale kitchen, or sorry, a wholesale kitchen in your house, and then something else. There's two different things. I'd have to look at it, but I
Yeah.
believe, yeah.
I know that there's a couple of like commercial kitchens where
Hmm.
you essentially are bringing your supplies to a
Right,
space that is like registered and
right.
safe surf certified and
Hmm.
all of that, and you
Hmm.
kind of store your things in there.
Hmm.
And that's more of like the legitimate way to go around
Yeah.
selling your food
Yeah. Sometimes those spaces aren't as accessible though, but like it's
or
one of those
very
things
pricey.
like, yeah, yeah, I can imagine. We've been talking about food a lot. I'm definitely going to have a snack after this.
I know. I don't know why my brain is on the food industry, but
Yeah. I think that's also the sort of the easiest one to demonstrate, because then if
mhm.
someone has like kind of an off the wall idea, like it's hard to be like, oh, have a pop up with that. Or maybe you can have a pop up with plants. I don't know. Um, if that's something that
That's
you're
true.
into. Yeah. Let's see. I'm trying to think. Do we have any other comments? Someone said the SBA is also helpful. Like I said, there are a bunch of
Yep.
community partners. Yeah. Do you mind just sharing some of the partners that you guys work with, or
Sure.
yeah.
So we have worked with the um, BECMA, which is the Black
Hmm.
Economic Council of Massachusetts.
Right.
They're almost like the Black Chamber of Commerce throughout the
Mm.
state. They're really great. They're good advocacy. They have tons of different resources. We've worked with Mass Growth Capital
Hmm.
Corporation, MGCC. They have lots of different grants, services available. They were kind of one of the pioneers to help with the PPP and getting banks on board to help those underserved markets get access to the PPP loans.
Hmm.
LISC, which is another kind of national organization that has roots in Boston. It's called Local Initiative Support Corporation. They're another one that has tons of small business assistance. There's also accelerator programs. I
Hmm.
don't know if your audience is familiar with those, but
Sure. Like E for All and
yep,
those
E
sorts of
for
things.
All. You have Center for Women in
Hmm.
Enterprise that does a
Right.
great amount of work. The Main
We
Streets
work with them.
organizations for kind of the
Yes.
brick and mortar shops
Hmm.
that are out there. And then a lot of the times, depending on the area that you live in, connecting with your city government. Most have a small business,
Mm-hmm.
either committee, department, task force that is tapped into different
Mm-hmm.
resources as well. Um, Also, like in the Boston area, there are so many schools and universities here. Like a lot of the times, you have business departments that are willing to
Mm-hmm.
have interns support you. So the it's really endless.
Yeah. So what I've done is I actually pulled up BECMA, MGCC, and LISC on the screen so people can see. And I'm just popping these in the chat so people, if they wanted to get the links to those. Um, but like the other thing I was gonna say is, yeah, a lot of there's a couple of law schools in the area who do some pro bono work as well.
Yeah.
We have pro bono legal services at the BPL, and I can put that link in the chat once I find it. But
There's There's
yeah.
also, if you're in the Boston area, a lot of
Hmm.
community development corporations. So some of the CDFIs that I had mentioned before that do
Right.
small business lending also do small business technical assistance. So you can get people to help you with marketing, helping you with
Hmm.
like your financials and
Hmm.
projections. Interrise is another organization
Right.
that works nationally. Uh, Optima Business Bootcamp helps entrepreneurs.
Hmm.
They have like training and all different types of business modules that you can go through. And these are
Oh
the
yeah.
majority of these programs are all either free or very, very low cost. So, when I say do your homework and don't pay for these things, they're definitely out there.
Yeah. There's a lot of help that you can get and prepare you to get that loan or that grant.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So let's see. Um, when we're talking about some of the nonprofit stuff, let's switch back. Um, we mentioned fiscal sponsorship or fiscal agents at the beginning.
Mhm.
Um, so like if you were going to do that, what would be some recommendations if that's the route you wanted to go? Because again, this is kind of like doing your pop up idea, but seeing if,
Oh,
yeah,
that's a good way to think about it, actually. That's
yeah,
a good comparison.
yeah.
So I know in the past, I've worked at nonprofit
Mm-hmm.
organizations that have had either like different programmings
Mm-hmm.
that they've offered, or they've had grants in the past where they weren't able to basically execute all parts of the plan. So they looked for
Mm-hmm.
different partners that they were already connected with.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the times they were like volunteer organizations. Um, Neighborhood organizations, and in those situations, uh, being connected to a nonprofit and
Mm-hmm.
seeing if they were willing and able to kind of take you on as a vendor. Having a
Right.
fiscal sponsor is essentially someone who's taking on like the financial obligation
Mm-hmm.
of a nonprofit, or of an organization that doesn't have a kind of system already set up to take on grants or
Mm-hmm.
any kind of loan or anything like that. So the way in which I would do that is probably, already having an existing relationship with that nonprofit, and then seeing if there are services that you can provide that they might need.
Right. Oh, and that helps them too because that gives them the ability to sort of scale up their operations, especially if they wanted to try something new. Um,
Hmm.
yeah. I was trying to find that Goodwin thing, so I like popped up the slide, but I couldn't find that link. I will definitely
Okay,
put that in the description.
perfect.
Yeah. But the other thing I would like to mention is like also because we were talking about nonprofit stuff. Because we're a Foundation Center Network partner, we have access to the Foundation Center Network stuff, and that's through Candid, and they have a bunch of free trainings online. They have one
Ooh.
on fiscal sponsorship, actually, um, which I should have pulled up. Whoops, but I can find that. But it's one of those things where like people. I think it's funny that entrepreneurs, whether they trying to work in the social space as a nonprofit or as a small business, think that they have to go alone. Like,
Hmm.
I think that's so strange when really, like, you can sort of ride in someone's wake. And I know that's like, I don't know, is it ego? Who knows? Like,
Yeah, I've
yeah,
definitely
yeah.
talked with some early stage entrepreneurs, nonprofits who
Mm-hmm.
have contemplated like doing it on your own or working with
Mm-hmm.
a fiscal agent. I think it's, something that is based on the individual, but thinking
Mm-hmm.
about what your capacity is. And just like you said, Amber, like thinking about it as a pop-up shop, like maybe you're
Mm-hmm.
with them for 6 months or maybe you're with them for a year and seeing, okay, that there is really a need for the whatever service it is that you're trying to do, and then kind of branching off on your own. The other thing that's really the other thing that's good about is that you're able to actually have a precedence for the work. So when you are going out there and applying for grants in the future, you can
Mm-hmm.
say, we have this history of working with this specific nonprofit, and we've had a good relationship with them, and
Mm-hmm.
you have a track record that's already built in.
Sure. And also, if you've never run a nonprofit before, you can also see inside like what that administration kind of looks like. And I think if you've never run a business before and like a nonprofit's like an extra set of hoops you got to jump through, it's probably a good idea just to see what that administrative piece looks like before you even decide, oh, is this for me? Yeah.
Yeah, third
Yeah.
sector New England also comes to
Mm-hmm.
mind. They
Oh,
have a
yep.
lot of resources for starting a nonprofit as well.
I'll just pop that up. Third sector New England. Oh, they didn't come up. Isn't it tcne.org? Oh,
TSNE.
yeah.
Yeah, TSNE.
Yeah. So I'll just, oh, Texas. What is this? Uh, I was too lazy and I didn't want to type out third sector New England.
Okay.
Yeah. Isn't that terrible? Kind of, but that was weird. But I'll pop this in the chat too, because that is another great resource for folks. Um, yeah. So
When you guys are meeting with small businesses, what
mhm.
are there kind of main challenges that people have when it comes to banking that you're seeing?
Yeah. So what people are coming in is they typically, when we speak to entrepreneurs in particular, they're like, "Oh, I heard I can get free money from the government for grants." And I think it has to do with that. Remember that like guy in the Riddler suit with the money? Like I still
Yeah,
think people think that that's like a
those
real thing.
commercials. Yeah.
Yeah, Gary Lesko or something. Yeah, I remember those because we used to carry the book,
Mm,
but like I don't think there's been one published since like 2004 or 2006. I might be wrong about that, but people think, oh, can I get a small business grant? And I always
mm,
kind of explain that like unless you're doing like something sciencey, really, or in technology like the SBIR or TTR sort of grants, there are no grants really for business unless you go to specific like government things like the NSF, well, which is science again, or I guess the Department of Education. It really depends, and a lot of those aren't for business development.
yeah.
So yeah, like that's, and I'm usually like, you have to get an SBA loan. Here's the list of lenders, and people are like, meh. That's
Yeah.
basically the fight. That not the fight, but it feels like it sometimes. And they're like, "You sure you can't get a grant?" And I'm like, "Pretty sure," because can you
Yeah.
tell me firsthand? Are there grants that like you
Yeah.
know?
I mean, I think the majority of the grants that we have,
Mhm.
or any bank usually comes through their foundation. And
Oh,
usually if you're
okay,
getting a foundation grant, they're typically for nonprofit organizations.
right.
Yeah, there are some situations where you might see sponsorships.
Hmm.
Some banks have like a foundation and a sponsorship department where you'll get like small grants for some small businesses, but that depends on the company, the organization, your relationship with them.
Yeah. That's like one of the biggest questions that we get,
Yeah,
and like you'd really have to have that relationship with the bank to sort of figure out whether or not you'd qualify for one of those
for sure.
sponsorships. Yeah.
Yeah, and
Uh
and that really comes with some time. In those situations where you do see the sponsorships, it's
mhm.
usually 4, 5, 6 years of things for the small business.
Mm.
I haven't seen them where it's like, oh, this is our kind of first trial or first run.
Okay. Yeah. They really want that proven track record. So,
Yeah, but there are a lot of small
mhm.
business grant programs that are out there right now just because of everything happening with COVID.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's something that you would have to, I would say the company that I had mentioned before, LISC,
Hmm.
is one. A lot of these kind of larger, like Verizon and Netflix and some of those major companies are doing small business grants.
Okay.
So this is a very unique time because folks are categorizing them as
Mhm.
recovery grants.
Okay. Yeah. Recovery grants, even if it, if it's not it, are these for people who currently have a business, or does it depend on the grantor? It's not
Yeah,
someone starting up, or
yeah, that's the
yeah. Okay.
difference. Yeah, you have
Okay.
to kind of prove that you've been in business for a year or 2 years before COVID. But yeah, that's a good point.
Is it the same thing with the PPE where you had to have been in business before February 15th of 2020? Okay.
hmm Some of
Okay.
them depend, but the majority want to really support businesses that are in a hardship right now due to COVID,
Right.
and not so much like the new ones.
Yeah.
But when you are applying for a loan from a small business,
Mhm.
just making sure that you fully understand what the terms are.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
there are some that have really favorable interest rates or repayment rates.
Mhm.
Some I've seen they've had like flexibility around like waiting the first year or two and just paying interest and then paying principal and interest after. So
Okay.
there's a lot of creativity in lending that people might not be aware of.
Okay. Are
Again,
there
a line
things?
of credit also, as opposed to a loan, that might
Oh
rate
yeah.
a little differently. So depending
What's
on
the
what your
difference between a line of credit and a loan?
are. So
Yeah.
the line of credit
Mhm.
is almost used like a credit card, right? So
Okay.
it's like you only use the funds when you need something. It gives you a little bit more flexibility.
Uh-huh.
Whereas a loan, you would take a loan out and you would pay it back monthly, like your car or mortgage loan. Whereas a line of credit, you're going to be paying based on whatever it is that you spend. So if you spend $500 on a piece of equipment, you're going to be paying back just that $500, not the entire line of credit amount. It could be a line of credit for 5,000, but you're only paying on the amount that you took or the amount that you
Ah.
spent.
Ooh, that's interesting. So the financing piece, like that might be a better avenue rather than like, especially if you don't need to do anything particularly cash intensive at the beginning of the business. Maybe a line of credit's a better. Ah, I never thought about it that way.
Yeah, and that's
Yeah.
why you want to make sure that when you're going in
Hmm.
and talking to banks, you're like really asking them about like what is available to me. It's
Hmm.
more than just what might just like reach the eye. And sometimes banks are having different promotions, or
Hmm.
again, like I said, you might get some CDFIs that have some really kind of creative products. Crowdfunding is a huge thing now. Like
Oh
that's a whole
yeah.
nother area. So there's a whole bunch of ways that you can essentially fund your business.
Yeah. I was gonna say I think Massachusetts also allows for equity crowdfunding too, which is even crazier. I bet. Yeah.
I've seen that.
Yeah.
There's an
S-
organization that I used to work with called Kiva.
Yep.
Kiva is also another great place for early stage businesses to get a 0% interest loan,
Hmm.
which you have to pay back, but there's no interest. So a lot of different
Okay.
options
Yeah, I was gonna say Kiva does banking all over the world. I'm actually just
all over
gonna
the world. Yeah.
yeah, I'm just gonna pop that in the chat because that's actually kind of a cool resource that I even forgot about. Oh, I love having these conversations. It's so we got
Yeah.
a comment, so it's thanks for all these resources, um,
Oh,
and
thanks for
yeah,
tuning in.
yeah. So we have about 5 minutes left. And so I think the theme of the day is do your homework. Is
Absolutely.
yeah. And part of starting your own and running your own small business is doing your homework. And if you can't do that, you know, maybe
Yeah.
it's not for you or not at this time because I
Yeah.
think if you have a certain amount of bandwidth, whatever it is, you're going back to school, you had kids or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. Maybe it's not, the timing's off. So
Yeah, do your homework, and the homework is varied depending on what it is that you want to do and what your interest is. It could be kind of like market research that we talked about earlier. It could
mm-hmm.
be just talking with a small business or a nonprofit around how they got started.
Right.
Um, I mean, I'm a millennial, so I'm like
Yeah,
born on Google. You can literally Google anything and get information that way. You know what I mean?
that's
Like there's
true.
a plethora of information out there around like starting and running your business, things that you should be aware of.
Yeah.
But in addition to starting your homework, I also think like being an entrepreneur is it's more reachable than people actually think about. Like if you have a solid
Yes.
plan and if you have a solid strategy, you can be successful. It's just around tapping into the right resources.
Right. And I think a lot of people who feel disadvantaged, though, like if you don't have that immediate support system, it probably feels like insurmountable. And especially if you are going into a bank. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. It's really important to have a support system for sure. When you're thinking about who
Mm-hmm.
your team should be, we talked about scaling and growing
Yep.
beforehand. It's really important to bring people on that have different skill sets from you. You don't want to have five people, all with the same background, all with the
Right.
same skill sets, all from the same area working on something, because then it doesn't really bring you any leverage. So thinking about who your team is, maybe you want someone who's more operationally based,
Mm-hmm.
someone who's more of like a people person for, the person
Yeah.
that's going to be going out there and doing the sales component or whatever it is. But,
Right.
think about building a strong infrastructure up, who's going to be providing your
Mm-hmm.
legal support, that kind of stuff.
Right. Law things. Those are awful. You think finance is bad, law is worse.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, let's see. Any parting thoughts? So because we have 2 minutes left.
Um,
Yeah. Or if there's anything that we didn't cover today that you wanted to just give a shout out to or whatever. Yeah.
I think I'm always been a fan of entrepreneurship as a way
Mm-hmm.
for people to really like supplement their income, but also to just be
Mm-hmm.
creative.
Hmm.
I think when we think about entrepreneurship, we tend to think about like, these big kind of tech institutions and apps, but that's really not what entrepreneurship is about. It's really around kind of having an idea or having a concept that you feel is needed that you don't see, and
Mm-hmm.
what you're able to provide to people that's not already there. So it's
Yeah.
just kind of a push for people who have a belief in something that they want to see through.
Yeah. Oh, well, thank you so much. And
Thanks
thank you
for
for
having me.
yeah. I really appreciate your time this morning. I just want to throw up on the screen, like, just for folks, like, if you have any other questions, you can just email us at ask@bpl.org, or you can check out the events. My colleague popped the events link in the chat. So if people wanted to come to our third Coffee with KBLIC, which will be on March 8th, and that'll be specifically about veterans issues. So we'll be excited to have that, and we're excited to have the folks here from Reevx Labs. So I really appreciate you taking the time this morning and imparting your wisdom. I think
Thank
yeah,
you.
well, it's one of those things where, like, again, banks seem intimidating, but really it's just having the conversation like this, because at the end of the day, the bank wants to be able to make money off of you, kind of, and you
Yes.
want to be able to make money. And so the conversation, if you're just realistic about it, I think it's just like, how can we both benefit,
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, yeah, thank you so much for joining us, and
All
thanks
right.
everybody. Yeah. Um, have a great morning, and it looks like the sun's starting to come out a little bit.
I hope
So,
so.
yeah, I hope so too. It was so dreary this morning.
I know.
Um,
Well,
yeah,
thanks for having me. It was good to see you.
it was good to see you too.
All
All
right.
right. Have a
Bye.
good evening, or good evening. Wow. Everything blends together. Bye bye.
Bye.